Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and look at how global geography actually shapes massive crises and, quite literally, your grocery bills. When we think about global supply chains, we tend to picture these endless oceans and open, limitless skies. But the reality? The reality is so much more constrained. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating story about one nation that, pretty much by sheer accident of geography, has suddenly become the world's absolute emergency supply route for agriculture. Now, I want you to imagine a scenario where a massive crisis cuts off the world from critical supplies, forcing us to desperately look for a geographic loophole. In the global trade network, especially when we talk about the Middle East, there is this one massive vulnerability. Almost every single major Gulf exporting state is locked behind one highly vulnerable maritime doorway. And if that doorway closes, global agriculture faces a totally catastrophic shock. So to really grasp this, we have to start by understanding the concept of a bottleneck. A bottleneck is, well, exactly what it sounds like. It's the narrow neck of a bottle that restricts how fast the contents can actually pour out. In a geopolitical crisis, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the ultimate severe bottleneck. Suddenly, all those agricultural resources that the world desperately needs to grow its food get trapped inside, creating this massive ripple effect of food shortages all across the globe. All right, so let's move into section 1, bypassing the bottleneck, the alternate emergency exit. And this brings us to the alternate emergency exit strategy. Think of it as a crucial backup plan for when your main doorway is securely locked. It's kind of like being in a crowded building when the main doors are totally jammed, right? You immediately, desperately start scanning the room for the emergency exit. In the context of Gulf exports, when that primary pathway, the Strait of Hormuz, becomes impassable or too dangerous, global markets are forced to find a secondary, accessible route just to keep the supply chain alive. Which perfectly illustrates this huge contrast between the trapped Gulf nations and Oman. See, while massive exporters like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE sit entirely inside the Strait of Hormuz, Oman's geography is completely unique. Their major ports, Sohar, Duqm, and Salalah, are situated right there on the Gulf of Oman and the Indian Ocean. Ships leaving those ports don't have to risk going anywhere near the bottleneck. They've got direct, totally unimpeded access to the Arabian Sea and global shipping lanes. That takes us to section 2, the fertilizer lifeline, and feeding the world in a crisis. Here's the thing, Oman isn't just a convenient transit route. It actually produces the very agricultural materials the world desperately needs right now. The country boasts its own domestic fertilizer production capacity, specifically these vital urea and ammonia plants. And these are the foundational ingredients required to grow the world's food. These facilities at Sohar and Sur are actively churning out materials built entirely for export. So the crucial point here is that while Oman normally only accounts for about 5 to 6% of Gulf fertilizer exports, that share becomes disproportionately massive when everyone else is blocked. I mean, in normal peaceful times, 5 to 6% is just a drop in the bucket, right? But flip the script. When a crisis slams the Strait of Hormuz shut, that tiny 5 to 6% suddenly becomes literally 100% of the available Gulf supply. Because it is the only accessible Gulf origin product, desperate markets are already bidding up the premium. We're seeing India reportedly negotiating priority access, nations that absolutely rely on these imports to feed their populations. Countries like Pakistan, Thailand, various East African nations, they're all scrambling to explore emergency procurement from Oman. It has literally become the only game in town, turning a small market share into an all-out global bidding war. But wait. Let's look at section 3, 3 major caveats, and the fragility of this lifeline. Before we call this the perfect fix, there are 3 major caveats that threaten to totally sever this accidental lifeline. We're looking at limited production capacity, uncertain regional safety, and surging insurance premiums. Let's actually break each of these down so we can see why this alternate exit is actually pretty fragile. First up, Oman's capacity is only a fraction of the region's total, meaning it simply cannot fully replace the output of its larger neighbors. The reality of the math here is completely unavoidable. Even running at absolute maximum output, the facilities in Oman are a tiny fraction of the massive combined capacity of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. So yes, Oman can provide a lifeline, but it cannot feed the entire world by itself if the rest of the region remains locked down. Second, regarding safety. Iranian drone attacks have actually targeted Omani territory, including hitting the critical port of Duqm 3 separate times. 3 times. This really shatters the illusion that just being outside the Strait of Hormuz guarantees safety. The infrastructure that makes this alternate emergency exit possible is, unfortunately, actively in the line of fire. And it doesn't stop there. These attacks impartially show that Iran's willingness to strike Omani targets seriously undermines the assumption that geography alone protects the country. It's not just the port of Duqm. Even Salalah, which is located way down in the far south of the country, has been targeted. We've even seen a merchant ship attacked right off the coast of Muscat. The geographical advantage definitely exists for sure, but the physical safety of the route is highly uncertain. Which leads straight to our third caveat. Every additional attack erodes Oman's financial advantage by driving up war risk insurance rates. Now, while these premiums haven't necessarily spiked to the insane extremes seen for vessels actually transiting the Strait of Hormuz itself, they have absolutely surged. Every single time a drone flies or a ship gets targeted, doing business there becomes exponentially more expensive. And that directly attacks the economic viability of using Oman as the emergency bypass. Let's wrap up with Section 4, the limits of neutrality, or diplomacy under fire. While Oman's historical neutrality and diplomatic channels do provide some protection, it is an incredibly delicate balancing act. Oman has historically worked really hard to maintain open diplomatic lines with Iran throughout this wider crisis. And in theory, right, this neutrality should shield them. But as the source material points out, neutrality is an incredibly fragile concept when drones and actual missiles are actively flying through the region. The tragic irony here is that successfully functioning as the alternate emergency exit actually invites maximum pressure. It makes Oman a target. This is the ultimate paradox of the entire situation. Iran's goal in blockading a choke point is to exert maximum global pressure. So if Oman successfully relieves that pressure by bypassing the bottleneck, it naturally draws the crosshairs onto itself. The better Oman is at being the lifeline, the more dangerous its position becomes. Ultimately, Oman is hands down the most fascinating small country story in this food crisis, but its lifeline is thin. As one expert puts it, Oman can help at the margin. It cannot solve the problem. And I think that quote just perfectly captures the reality. Geography has given Oman this unique advantage, making it an accidental, absolutely crucial supplier of global fertilizer in a crisis. But when you start weighing the limited capacity, the physical dangers, the surging insurance costs, and the super delicate geopolitics, we have to recognize the limits. They can help at the margin, but they cannot entirely solve the massive bottleneck problem of the Gulf. So I'll leave you to ponder this massive question. Is it even possible for the international community to designate and protect this fragile alternate exit as a neutral humanitarian corridor? Or is it just doomed to be swallowed by the wider conflict? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.